Albert Einstein once said, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." Keep this in mind as we discuss today NATO expansion eastward and what does it mean for the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
David and I would like to thank you for all of your comments and for subscribing. It means a lot to us to have a worldwide audience and an audience that's growing so big, so fast.
Well, indeed, Ross, we truly appreciate you guys for all that support. It's because we want to grow this channel bigger in order to reach larger audience so we can raise awareness. You know, geopolitics issues, some of us might think, oh, it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with all of us and impact us on a daily basis. It impacts us, our families, our businesses, and this is why we decided to devote our time by bringing you information that will be useful to you. So let's get back to the topics, Ross.
As we've discussed over and over again, so much is going on in Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, Crimea, and the role of NATO. What do you see actually going on here?
Well, that is correct, Ross. It's been a conversation going on as to what is the purpose of of NATO. What is the mission of NATO? And yet, with what's going on in Eastern Europe, especially now with the tensions between Russia and Ukraine, you can just see that this role of NATO becomes now even more sort of crucial. But to what end? It's because dealing with Russia is no small matter. But to NATO, Russia will always remain the enemy. Yeah.
You know, to put this in an historical perspective, right after World War II, the Russian ambassador to the United States met with the new president, Harry Truman. And this is a historical fact that was recorded. I saw a video of it. Mm-hmm. And Harry Truman degraded and humiliated the Russian ambassador, and he took that back to Stalin. With what do you think the result of that was?
Cold War.
Cold War.
But also there is another element that I believe, when I wrote my book, I did the research, and it was one particular key information that I found was that at that time, the United States went ahead and shared technology about nuclear with the Allies, but not the Russians, the Soviet Union at that time. And Stalin took issue with that. So that was also another element that shaped the Cold War for the half century that we saw till the end of the Soviet Union. So we thought.
As if the Cold War ever really ended.
Yeah, it really never did. Because now with this issue of Crimea, Ukraine rather, and the tensions with Russia, it indicates exactly that. Cold War never ended. So, because now it becomes the question of, there are those who are saying, well, Ukraine should become a member of NATO. No. NATO is going to have to, I know I say it straightforward. NATO is probably just giving a lip service to Ukraine.
Right.
Because do you know what the consequences will be? If you are to admit NATO, Ukraine into NATO, then NATO will be obligated to defend Ukraine. Does NATO wants to go into a war with Russia on behalf of Ukraine?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
It doesn't make any sense at all. And it's in Russia's strategic interest to have a major influence in the Ukraine because it's such an easy path to go from Europe to Russia across that plain one day, and they're across with tanks, whatever.
That's correct. Well, this is why it's really interesting, just in these recent tensions between Russia and Ukraine, you know what the Russians did? The first thing is they blocked the Black Sea.
Oh, yeah.
No vessels will go in or out. So that was the first time. And this explains as to why Russia took Crimea. But again, for you to know, and to the rest of people in the West that they do not know the history of Crimea, Crimea belonged to Russia at some point. It was till 1954 when Nikita Khrushchev handed Crimea as a gift to Ukrainian. And when, of course, Ukraine got its independence in 1991 after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, Crimea was became part of Ukraine at that time. So
And it's primarily a Russian language, Russian culture
that's correct
situation.
And same thing with the Donbass.
Oh, in the far east of
Yeah,
Ukraine.
there are ethnic Russians, and that's just we tend not to read a lot in history, and that's why we don't understand this kind of dynamics,
Right.
and how it works for why Russia is behaving the way it behaves. But even if you think about even some scholars here in the U.S. or foreign policy experts, they did sort of predict that the issue of multipolar system will reemerge. And that was the idea of how the world is changing, because everybody was under the impression that the US is the only sole superpower. That might be the case for not anymore. Not anymore. That's like as some politicians in the United States, they have been arguing for the reemergence of the multipolar system. And that's what we're seeing today with Russia, China, US tensions, and so forth.
You know, you present this in your book, The Dynamics of Russia's Geopolitics, Remaking the Global Order. Let me read something from the book. The rivalry between the United States and Russia today differs markedly from what it was a few decades ago, though its tenets remain the same. Still, the desire to maintain an ideological influence drives both Russia and the U.S. to highlight the intensity of their rivalry. I point out the recent Ukraine crisis. In my opinion, the crisis demonstrates that it ended the so-called post-Cold War era, though the Cold War never ended in the first place. Its ending was an illusion brought on by the West trying to justify its policies toward Russia by inflating the idea that it's having been victorious.
Well, that's correct, Ross. That's how I saw it. When I wrote the book a couple of years ago, that's exactly all the research that I conducted point out to that the fact that the thinking in the West was always, we defeated the communism and so on. Yes, you might defeated an ideology, but it's still well and alive. And the current crisis between Russia and Ukraine is a demonstration of that.
Exactly right.
And this is where it becomes the question of, okay, then what will be the role of NATO in all this? What NATO can do? And Russia made it clear with Vladimir Putin's speech yesterday or recently about the red lines.
Yes.
What's interesting, Ross, for you to understand that when Vladimir Putin mentioned a red line, he didn't define where those red lines are. Because those red lines could be in the Black Sea, they could be in the Baltics, they could be in the Arctic, or anywhere else where Russia's interests are threatened. That's what I found very interesting.
Yes.
So it becomes the question of, will NATO get engaged in a conflict with Russia on behalf of Ukraine? I don't think so.
It doesn't make any sense for them to. Too much is at stake.
That's correct. And this is why the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, when he went to Paris, he was hoping that Europe will sort of come to his defense, but he found out that
they weren't willing to come.
No, because they knew what the consequences will be. It's the same arguments that have been made before. Well, the U.S. should place its Patriot missiles in Poland.
Bad idea.
It is a bad idea. I believe, based on the research that I conducted, that if the U.S. ever does that, Russia will activate its strategic nuclear tactical weapons. And guess who's going to be hurt first? Polish people, Europeans.
Right.
That's what's going to be happening.
Vladimir Putin actually laughed out loud at the prospect. He said, the United States said that they're thinking of putting missiles there so that they can defend against the Middle East. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
No one could possibly believe that.
Not at all. Not at all. So if we are to think about the bottom line, Ross, what would you think of all this?
Vladimir Putin is really staking his claim to here's where Russia really stands. Russia is taking care of Russia, as they should.
Like any other country.
Like every individual and every country.
Absolutely correct.
Self-interest is always at the peak of taking care of yourself. So, as we look at what's going on with Russia, the Ukraine, Crimea, this conflict there's no easy solution to this. But it's important to not take this to a point of war.
I hope not.
I hope not too. Yeah. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other videos. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and as always,
stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.